All the very best people in the cultural community and the art community and the leaders of industry are solidly behind taking the art gallery to court. I admire their perspicacity. I'm worried about what they're going to do to the old courthouse, the magnificent old Rattenbury building with the incredible interior. Turn it into an art gallery and not rip out the interior, and you might find me supporting them. At the moment, they talk roughly of $16 or $17 million, and given the opportunity, my goodness, it might be 20 or more, depending on who and what the architect is. But I sent my artistic crew, the artistic side of Webster, out to take you back to the old courthouse as it really is and was. First, I want to express my thanks to the Vancouver City Archives for making the old photographs and documentation available to us on this. Why am I doing this? Well, myself, I'm a traditionalist. I believe in pomp and circumstance, especially in the administration of justice. One reason I don't like the new People's Palace of Law at $140 million. But let's have some nostalgia first, and what people think about taking the art gallery to court and ripping out the inside. My old friend Mae Garnett.
You just cheat a touch to your right, Jack.
Okay, I'll just put that much again. A little technical difficulty this morning, which is a bit of a pity. But what I'm going to do now is let you hear some people who have a little information about the old courthouse. And I'd like now, if we can see Mae Garnett from the appropriate part of this proposition, that the old courthouse, the Rattenbury building, be turned into an art gallery at goodness knows what expense.
I think it's bloody awful.
That bad?
Yes.
Give me your reasons, Mae.
Well, one reason, it doesn't make sense because they'll need that space for courts in a very short time. The building was built as a courthouse. It looks like a courthouse, and it certainly never looked like an art gallery, even when they tear the inside of it out. Mm-hmm. And I think it's criminal to tear those old courtrooms out.
But perhaps you're just being nostalgic and sentimental from all the years you covered the proceedings in that court.
I don't think so. Other people agree with me that they'll never get the equivalent of those courtrooms. I heard somebody say the other day they hoped they'd never tear out the assize court. And when you remember that Court of Appeal with the beautiful carved woodwork in it, mm-hmm. and that one of the ushers used to go in there or stay after hours to polish it up.
Most impressive place.
Yes.
They tell me that one of the draft plans for the courthouse, if they get the money to tear it apart, mm-hmm. is to put escalators up where the rotunda is to the assize court.
Yes.
What would you think of that?
I think it's awful. That beautiful marble floor, mm-hmm. and that rotunda is lovely.
Looking back, though, is there an added ingredient to justice if you have courtrooms like that, as distinct from the fancy new Ericsson building?
I think there is.
What is it?
I think people are more impressed. There's more dignity to it. The only really modern courtrooms I've seen were in Victoria, mm-hmm. the new courthouse there. But, when you think of the Chief Justice's court in the old building, and the one across the hall, which used to be Judge Murphy's courtroom. Lovely oak furniture. A lot of it was built downstairs in the carpenter shop there. Beautiful leatherwork. Yes. The RCMP and the uniforms on assize court days. Yes. And it was built, they had the exit for the prisoners right in the body of the courtroom. 3 stories up to the assize court? 2 anyway. 2 stories from the ground floor up. Tell me, do you think it can be turned into an art gallery without affecting the major construction of that place? I don't think these modern art gallery people would be satisfied with anything except tearing out all the insides. And I did see a suggested sketch for the renovation of the building, and it included tearing out all the inside of the courthouse. Everything? Everything. The paneling? Paneling and everything. The benches? Sure. Tell me this, what do you think, and you've been around public life a long while, Mae Garnett, mm-hmm. what do you think it will finally cost to redo that building into a satisfactory art gallery? Well, never be satisfactory to me, but it would be maybe between $15 and $20 million. Well, and why should the taxpayers cough up that? The art gallery people have already got $4 million. Why can't they go and build their own building? Instead of stealing your courthouse? Instead of stealing the courthouse.
Well, I don't know what...
It'll never look like an art gallery.
You said
Yeah.
that we need the courtrooms already?
Well, maybe not right now, but they will very soon, I'm told, by people who work in the building, you know.
And what do you think overall of the entire proposition that they rip out the insides, redo it up at goodness knows what cost, and do away with courtrooms we might well need in the near future?
I think it's criminal. I think it's time they used a little common sense.
Mae was always strong in common sense. I worked with her for years as a reporter around the courthouse in Vancouver. But before we come to the hard stuff on it, let's meet another person well aware of the history of the courthouse, Cecil Akrigg, who was an official and a senior official when he retired after 31 years, and what he remembers of the old courthouse. For 30 years, you worked in our magnificent old courthouse. What do you think they'll do to it if they turn it into an art gallery?
Well, I would hate to think that they'll desecrate the interior of it, ripping out the paneling, for instance, that exists in the main Court of Appeal room, that they would even consider installing escalators in the center rotunda area of the main entry. That interior has a particular air to it that creates a tradition when you're within the building.
I believe there's a part of this that most of the public have not seen. Describe that to me.
Well, our basement areas, of course, were something out of a medieval dungeon. The original elevator shaft didn't allow the elevator to go down to the basement. It could only go halfway because there was a massive boulder under the very core of the elevator shaft. Because we wanted to expand the use of that basement for storage areas, there was a very delicate operation done in the 60s to remove that boulder and install modern elevator service to that area. But those dungeons were originally the place where the old coal-fired boilers were operating. There were massive storage areas for court documents. The filing was on raw wooden shelves. The basement was subject to floods. We had to walk on duck boards in some cases to go into the file vaults. There were hanging incandescent lamps about every 20 or 30 feet. You found a file by groping, practically. It was a very primitive system in those days.
Was it overall at times a spooky kind of place?
Oh, spooky, yes. Shortly after I had started there, we sent one young clerk down to retrieve a file. He was basically acquainted with the filing areas, but he hadn't explored some of the side corridors and side rooms. And he came back very quickly after having been sent down and quite white-faced and saying, "My God, I found 2 purple men down there." And we were somewhat perplexed and said, "What do you mean, purple men?" He said, "I'll show you." And he took us down. We went around some of the narrow, twisting passages, and he was quite right. He did find 2 purple men. There were 2 deaf mutes who worked in the basement of that courthouse for many years, packing the dye which was used for dyeing farm gasoline into little paper envelopes. They would have a big 45-gallon barrel of this dye powder. They had a hand scoop, were filling these envelopes, sealing them, and passing them out in trays, and they were passed to the various dealers. The government somehow had come up with this job as an ideal occupation for the disabled and handicapped. And these poor devils had been attending there regularly for how many years, I have no idea, filling these envelopes with their dye. And of course it was working through their fingers and through their clothing, and It was everywhere, but nobody ever saw them outside of that. They must have come and gone in the dark because practically nobody else in the courthouse was aware that they were even...
What year would that be?
Oh, that was in the 50s.
In the old assize court, or in the old Court of Appeal cease, you had the red and the paneling and the leather and the mounties. Did that add something to the delivery of justice?
Well, I think it added to the public concept of the majesty and the power of the law. And the law has to be a very powerful force in any community. It's when you put the law into disrespect or treat it as a commercial enterprise that the public begin to look for other sources of authority. The court should be the...
Would it help? Do you think that kind of old-fashioned traditional court of justice helped people to tell the truth?
Well, I think it made a very severe impression on them, and I think psychologically it was very effective. That they realized when they were in the courthouse the nature of the building and the nature of the place in which they were appearing, the importance that the spectators in the community focus on them when they're giving evidence.
Can anything ever replace the dignity and the decorum and the majesty of that old courthouse when she was in full swing with the robed judges and the mounties and the traditional panoply and pomp?
Well, I'm a great traditionalist, Jack, and I believe the tradition of the law should be seen, and you see it best in suitable architectural surroundings. I think the old courthouse best presented that tradition.
The old courthouse was one of the first buildings designated as a heritage structure way back by City Council on December 17, 1974. The heritage protection applies only to the outside of the building. In May 77, the Vancouver City Council approved the designation of certain monies from certain sales for moving the present art gallery and the renovation of the courthouse for the new art gallery, subject to a renovation plan and a budget. I don't want to confuse you with too many facts. When I look at the caper we had over the Palace of People's Luxury Law, remember? 55 million, 80 million, 160 million, 200 million. We were finally assured that it came in at around 137 to 140 million dollars. And all the way through that caper, we knew that a number of the planned courthouses in the new People's Palace were wiped out. And we know now that there are official rumblings that very shortly we're going to be out of courthouse space in the new People's Palace. And we know too that the governments, federal court for instance, rent very expensive space in nearby buildings for courts which cannot be accommodated in the courthouse complexes. That's point number one. Point number two, we come to money. I admire the art gallery for their $4 million campaign for their pledges. They set out to get 2.5 million and they've got pledged 4 million. Where does the other money come from? Well, the city has committed 2.6 million out of general revenue, and they'll get about 2 million from the sale of the present art gallery site. The art gallery wants the federal government to donate $4.5 million. That hasn't yet been donated, right? The provincial government is donating the form of the land, and they're supposed to kick in another $2 million. All in all, it comes to about 16.1, maybe 17.6 million overall, taking in the value of the lease and the land. And these are real values. All the money is not yet there. Before I come to that, though, in these days, when you put in an architect to redesign the interior of a building, when you think of the costs in the People's Palace, there is no guarantee that it won't come out to goodness knows what more than what the paper figures, tentative paper figures, presently say. And just for the very purpose of this program, a little while ago, I asked Premier Bennett of British Columbia just how tightly he was committed to this proposition of more money from the provincial government, and here, in fact, is what he told me from that interview. It's well worth just getting precisely my question and answer to the Prime Minister of BC. Are you firmly committed to the culture group in Vancouver on taking the art gallery to court? It seems an incredible amount. It's going to cost you $25 million.
The province of British Columbia made a substantial donation when they donated to the city of Vancouver the property and building, which is called the old courthouse, for public use.
Right.
For the people of Vancouver, and useful in the heart of Vancouver for other people visiting Vancouver. So that's worth millions. The province has already made that commitment, and the city has the option to deal with that. And now there are proposals for it, the art gallery being one. And you know, I think the art is a very important part of our culture. We overlook it. Many do, and our young people, our people should be given more opportunity. That's a decision they have to make. They have a price, and they've done a job of going out now to match the province giving the building and the land to the city for a public use. The City of Vancouver might have to make a decision on money. I know that John Pitts and his committee certainly have harnessed the private sector. They say they have the federal government to make a contribution. When that's all over, I hope they have enough. They're showing some concern by coming back to us for an additional funding right now, but I'd like to see how they make out with the other governments, because we've made our donation.
They want another $4.5 million from you.
Well, you know,
and you know what happens? Governments
are there to help provide public facilities, and I'll tell you, you know, that's what we collect tax dollars for, and I'm a supporter of an art gallery in Vancouver and upgrading it. I think it's in a difficult situation.
Well, what you said to me quite clearly just now, Mr. Premier, was that you've given them the building, the city must do things, the feds must come in, and then if they come back to you, you'll see.
That's right, but I'd like to see that federal commitment. I'd like to see the check. I'd like to see what the city's doing.
Because you know what's going to happen. They're going to hire a fancy architect, and not $17.6 million. It's going to be $25 million later.
Well, you know,
and meanwhile, you're renting space for some of it, will be, for some of your government agencies in the Black Tower.
I'm surprised at you. You can't bottom line everything, Jack. Whether it's a stadium, that's for the people. You don't try and make it show. It doesn't have to show a profit. The same with culture. The same with the.
Yeah. It's my lack of culture, Mr. Bennett. I don't have much sympathy for the old art gallery.
But just think how you will improve after you get a chance to be exposed to it.
Too late, sir. Too late indeed. By the sheerest coincidence, in Vancouver today, on a purpose associated with this particular program this morning, is Pierre Burton. You have a position that I didn't know you held. What is it?
I'm chairman of the Board of Governors of Heritage Canada, which is the national charitable non-profit foundation involved in the built-up heritage of this country. We're in the preservation business. I like to say we're in the continuity business, because I think if the country loses physically every remnant of the past, it doesn't know where it's going, it has no future. You have to show a continuation. This is an old country. It's not as nearly as young as people think. And there's evidence of it here. There's evidence, as you see, in this courthouse today.
Let me be the first to put it to you, however, that the old courthouse from the outside looks like the ideal place for an art gallery.
Yes, it does. I was surprised. I have no objection to it as an art gallery. I was surprised to hear Mae Garnett say it doesn't look like an art gallery. It doesn't look like a Canadian art gallery, which are rather dull, flat, square buildings, you know, glass and concrete, but it looks like a European art gallery.
What about
it looks like the National Gallery of London, and only a smaller scale.
So the outside is suitable for an art gallery?
Yes, I think so.
What about the inside and the cost of preparing it in modern style, which I strongly suspect is their plan?
I'm not able to go into the cost, but I'll tell you this. There's a principle, I think, which ought to be examined here. And the principle is that you don't tear down one heritage building to find another underneath it, and you don't really destroy a piece of art in order to put up other pieces of art. I mean, this is surely common sense. What is inside that gallery is art. It's a form of art. And now, I don't know how the citizens of Vancouver, they probably think art is something, perhaps some people think that art is just a picture on a wall, but it's more than that. It is that dome. It is some of the, it's some of the workmanship that's inside. A building, after all, is a living history lesson. I don't understand really why a compromise can't be found here. I do not understand why that building has to be entirely gutted. You know, there are many art galleries in the world which don't hang pictures on white walls. The general cant in the art community is that's what you do. It isn't necessarily true. In a private home, for centuries, Paintings have been hung on paneled walls, very like the one in the courthouse that we saw just now in that picture. It may not be the ideal situation, and yet, what is the ideal situation? Is the ideal situation to ruin a piece of art and a piece of Vancouver's heritage, as we saw, in favor of the art gallery? I have no objection to the art gallery moving in there. I think it's probably a pretty good place. It's a center of town where people can see. It is an artistic building itself. The building itself is a piece of art, and I'm glad to see that it's been designated and is going to be preserved.
But the outside designation does not help the interior.
No, it doesn't.
And I can quote you an authority on that.
Well, you don't have to. I know this to be true, and I think most people do.
You and I therefore come to a slight parting of ways, me from my pragmatic viewpoint and you from your heritage kind of viewpoint. Moved, seconded and agreed that the exterior of the building must not be changed in any other
Agreed.
way. The interior of the building, I look at it from a pragmatic point of view. No, we are going to need new courthouses. Know that these courthouses have a tradition and a dignity which cannot be replaced anywhere else. And you're suggesting a compromise. Don't gut it.
I'm suggesting that it can be an art gallery without being gutted, and a great deal of money can be saved if somebody is brought in to look at it from that point of view. I think the only point of view probably, and I'm not that familiar with it, is the point of view that everybody has thought of gutting the inside. Well, now I think people ought to make a slight turn, about 45 degrees, and say, just a moment, can we retain the art in the new art gallery and at the same time add new art to it? And I
But
think
you know
that's
what will
possible.
happen. They'll want to take out the windows. They'll want air conditioning. They'll want escalators. They'll want elevators. They'll say the roof isn't sound anymore. The basement isn't sound anymore.
Well, I don't think they know that. In the first place, I suggest they go to the National Gallery in London or the Louvre in Paris, where there's no escalators in
No
the
more
major
freebie
art
trips for
galleries.
anybody. No more freebie trips.
You don't have to go there. I'm just suggesting they take a look at what exists in Europe and some of the finest art galleries in the world. They find that they're not escalators.
All right, Mr. Burton, for once you're not the moderator of the program. It's not a great debate, but it's an important debate.
Yes, it is.
I suggest that we continue it, and I suggest this morning we test the temper of the people of British Columbia on taking the art gallery to court from all aspects. Exterior, interior, which I worked there for years and never realized it was so magnificent until I saw what the cameramen had done with the cupola and the benches and that magnificent old jail
Can I make one point?
ladder.
Can I make one point, which is germane to this city? And that's the point about the Orpheum Theater. As you know, some years ago, an attempt was made to build a brand new hall for the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. It was going to cost, I think, somewhere around $30-odd million.
Who knows?
Finally, somebody said, just a moment, we have a theater. It is called the Orpheum. It is a fine example. It could be refurbished inside and out for much less than that. Indeed, it was, I think, refurbished for between $7 and $8 million, and happens to be one of the finest structures of its kind on the continent, with one of the finest acoustics on the continent, far better than the catch-as-catch-can acoustics that you get when you build a new concert hall. You never know what you're getting. It's a pick and a poke. So Vancouver has an example of what has been done at a great saving in the arts. And I think they ought to look at the art gallery and the courthouse from that point of view.
I'm correct. You probably know more than I do. The outside of the Orpheum is most unimpressive. It was the inside that was
That's
preserved.
right. It was the inside. That's right.
Webster, Pierre Burton, and you on taking the art gallery to court after this break.